The news at 10.
Egypt's military warns its politicians, resolve this crisis or we will act. In the air and on the airwaves, they've given the president and his opposition just 48 hours. Hundreds of thousands are on the streets again tonight, with mounting speculation the government could collapse. Also on the programme, America mourns as 19 firefighters die in wildfires still burning in Arizona. MPs move fast to say they'd reject a plan to pay them another £10,000.
I'm in Soweto, where I've been speaking to Winnie Mandela. As her ex-husband lies critically ill, she warns that the wrongs of apartheid have yet to be righted.
It is not a secret that the youth of our land is very angry.
And Murray marches on, but Laura loses and her Wimbledon is over.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham and Mark Austin in Soweto.
Good evening. The Egyptian army has waded into the anti-government protests in Egypt. The generals gave the country's democratically elected but now unpopular president an ultimatum. With hundreds of thousands on the streets of Cairo, as they still are tonight, the army said President Morsi had 48 hours to meet the people's demands, or it would come up with a plan. From Cairo, our international correspondent John Irvine reports.
It was pointed and patriotic, and the crowd loved it. An army fly-past signalling who's really laying down the law in Egypt. This was an acknowledgement that the will of the street had to be accommodated, and the masses appreciated the army's recognition of that. A year ago, the head of the army was pictured with the newly elected president. Today, the same general cut the legs from under Mohamed Morsi by issuing a 48-hour ultimatum to sort things out. Earlier, the beleaguered president had suffered the shame of watching as his party's power base here in Cairo was laid to waste. Looters were able to plunder at will as another apparatus of the state, the police, refused to lift a finger to stop them. In the space of a year, President Morsi assumed enormous power, only to see it chipped away in the space of a single day. Whether or not Egypt can peacefully transition from right now largely depends on his decision-making over the next 48 hours. It's more than 2 years since President Hosni Mubarak was forced out of office, and just 12 months since Mohamed Morsi became Egypt's first democratically elected leader. But in that time, he has failed to tackle the worsening economic crisis, with Egypt forced to import food and fuel as unemployment continues to rise. No one is sure where this country will go from here, but among the demonstrators in Tahrir Square, the consensus was that anyone would be better than Morsi.
Government here, I don't like the Morsi the government, and I want the army to go down the street and to be with the people to make a new government.
Please, Morsi, go out, please.
After a year that has amounted to a failed attempt at democratic rule, Egypt's politicians have 48 hours to seek and find redemption.
So, John, the crowds are clearly vast and still growing tonight.
Yes, it is. That army ultimatum has endorsed the concept of street demonstration and has encouraged people to come out. Indeed, the general who issued the ultimatum said the Egyptian people had spoken with unprecedented clarity, meaning he suspects the numbers are greater than when Hosni Mubarak was toppled. Indeed, the Interior Ministry here estimates that yesterday across Egypt, between 14 and 17 million people turned out. It's little wonder the army concluded that the political status quo is untenable.
So, John, what does happen next?
Julie, that's down to the politicians. The army says it doesn't want to mount a coup and that the ultimatum is intended to force the politicians here to compromise. But this turnout is a terrible indictment of all Egypt's politicians. When you think about it, if there was an effective government or an effective opposition, people wouldn't feel the need to do this. Now, Morsi has been weakened. He might want to compromise now, but the opposition has been so strengthened it mightn't be inclined to. But what this country desperately needs is for politicians of every hue to do some serious deal-making, to reach consensus and to show an ability that has so far been sadly lacking and has in fact resulted in this.
John, thank you. An elite troop of American firefighters has lost all but one of its members to the flames scorching the hillsides of Arizona. 19 of the 20 died in the worst day for American firefighters since 9/11. Many were young fathers. Their protective sheeting failed to protect them. Such was the heat of the flames. From the United States, our correspondent Robert Moore reports.
In a land so parched and enduring near record temperatures, wildfires are always dangerous. But driven by erratic winds, this was lethal on a shocking scale. An entire team of firefighters trapped with no escape route.
Right now, what we do know is that 19 firefighters were killed in what's probably the worst disaster that's taken place in wildland history here in the state of Arizona. The families are in terrible shock. Fire departments are like families, and so the entire fire department, the entire area, the entire state is being devastated by the magnitude of this incident.
This photo shows many of the men believed to have died, an elite fire crew nicknamed the Granite Mountain Hotshots. But last night, as they fought to create fire breaks and contain the blaze, despite all their experience, the swirling flames surrounded them on all sides. This video shows them in training, fully aware of the risks.
When we get out there, it's a completely different ball game. It's the real deal. We have to look out for each other. We have to have accountability. We have to trust each other.
The training footage also shows them deploying their emergency fire shelters, used if all else fails. But last night, many of the 19 were found dead in these shelters, their tactic of last resort not enough to save them. Residents across the area are deeply shaken by the ferocity of the fire.
We got the dogs, we got the wife, it's gone. The house is on fire when we left. Everything was there, but it was on fire.
The bodies of the lost firefighters have been retrieved and driven to the office of the local medical examiner. But even as that investigation begins, other teams are still fighting the fire from the air as well as from the ground.
There he goes, there he goes.
These barren hills are now the scene of the greatest tragedy for US firefighters since the terrorist attacks of September the 11th. Robert Moore, ITV News, in the United States.
With rumours circulating of a 10% pay rise for MPs, it fell to the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg to spell out that the public wouldn't understand if it went ahead. An independent review of MPs' pay is due to be published soon. It may not recommend 10%, but it is expected to suggest more than the 1% rise of other public service workers. Our political editor, Tom Bradby, reports.
I hereby declare that the said David William Donald Cameron is duly elected Member of Parliament for the Witney constituency.
It's certainly not a career that comes with any job security. Whether you're the Prime Minister or just a backbench MP, every 5 years you have to ask us to send you back here. So how much should we pay? Well, certainly not another £10,000 a year, you may say, which may be why the Deputy Prime Minister rather ducked the issue today.
MPs of whatever description at the end of the day are public servants paid by taxpayers, and that's why I think it would be incredibly, if not impossible, to explain to the public why MPs should be treated at this time so very differently to their constituents.
So it's simple then. It's a mad idea. But here's the thing, MPs handed the question of their pay over to an independent body, and they were under heavy pressure to do so.
We shouldn't really discuss our own pay. Nobody likes discussing their pay. You don't like discussing your pay. So I think this needs to be done by an independent body, and whatever they say, we should accept it.
Some are even prepared to argue that MPs should get a pay rise.
I was a businessman before I became an MP, so I took a massive pay cut when I came in, but I knew that was what I was letting myself in for. The concern I have is that we run the risk of Parliament being full of just two sorts of people, either people like me who'd made money or inherited money before they became MPs, or sort of 20 and early 30-somethings with no experience outside politics.
So how does an MP's £66,000 pay packet compare with others in the state sector? Well, a top civil servant can make $77.5, a senior NHS consultant about $81,000. The best head teachers get six figures, and the average for a local government chief executive is $144,000. And globally, the European Parliament pays £72,000. In cash-strapped Italy, it's $115,000, which is the same as America and was the same as Australia until yesterday. They got a £3,000 pay rise today. MPs of all parties complain that leaders of all parties have repeatedly ducked this issue over the years due to political expediency. They're probably right, and perhaps it does make sense to hand it to an independent body. But a pay rise in this climate is still a very tough sell. Tom Bradby, ITV News at Westminster.
The American intelligence contractor Edward Snowden, who leaked secrets about America's global spying, has asked for political asylum in Russia, where he's been hiding. Today, new revelations that America bugged European Union offices on both sides of the Atlantic have made the French and Germans furious, as our Europe correspondent Emma Murphy reports.
For 8 days, Moscow airport has been home to Edward Snowden, the CIA man without a passport or place to go, but with an awful lot of secrets to share on America's intelligence gathering operations. Now the 30-year-old fugitive has applied for asylum in Russia, something that's being considered, but with one surprising caveat.
If he likes to stay here, there is one condition. He should cease his work aimed at damaging our American partners.
That bonhomie may not be straight from the spy movies of the Cold War, but the fallout of Snowden's actions certainly is. Tonight, behind the darkened windows of the European Union buildings, a full-scale security sweep is underway to root out hidden devices. From the documents leaked, it's believed the US spied on the EU and European buildings, both at home and in the United States. France and Germany, particularly targeted, are now extremely put out.
We do know there is a necessity for controlling systems, notably in the fight against terrorism, but I don't think that risk exists in our embassies or within the EU.
It's just a couple of weeks since all those involved met at the G8, and 1 week before the start of EU-US trade talks. There are now demands that those are halted until America assures its allies they aren't being treated like enemies. In Germany, there's disbelief that a supposed friend could tap 500 million German phone calls, emails and texts a month. A spokesman for Chancellor Merkel saying such actions are unacceptable with the Cold War over. On a visit to Tanzania, President Obama confirmed the US was looking into the reports but wouldn't discuss intelligence gathering.
What I've said is to my team, take a look at this article, figure out what they may or may not be talking about, and then what we'll do is we'll communicate to our allies appropriately.
This isn't the first time the EU has been targeted. In the run-up to the Iraq war, listening devices were found here in the Justus Lipsius building. That was a very different era, though, and though some accept that a degree of monitoring will go on now, many are shocked by the scale of this latest development. When Edward Snowden started his leaks, the American authorities said he'd done significant and lasting damage to their intelligence gathering. Their actions may have done similar to American-European relations. Emma Murphy, ITV News, Brussels.
We'll have a first look at some of tomorrow's front pages later in the programme. Plus, another major upset at Wimbledon. The 5-times champion is out. And a stiff upper hip. The British Tour de France cyclist pedalling on with a fractured pelvis.
Well, I'm definitely going to give it a good go. My mum doesn't want me to.
Good evening from Soweto, once home to Nelson Mandela. Now, like everywhere else in South Africa, Soweto is hanging on every word in the latest bulletin on his health. His ex-wife, Winnie Mandela, has been telling me how angry she is that people have been talking about him in the past tense. And in the second part of an exclusive interview, she said she believes Mr. Mandela is in some ways disappointed at how the new South Africa is turning out.
And all around here is memorabilia from...
In Winnie Mandela's Soweto home is a room devoted to memories of her former husband and their life together, including his favourite picture of Winnie.
And that was the only picture he kept in prison. And that was the first picture I gave him.
Now she and their daughter Zinzi are angry. Many already talk of him as if he's passed away.
And the tendency also by part of the media who refer to their father in the past tense. This is so cruel, so inhuman.
And it's almost like it's a kind of like bizarre excitement, like, it has happened, he has gone. And somehow it just takes it somehow just removes the sense of humanity.
Winnie was at Mandela's side when he emerged from prison 23 years ago.
It was the greatest moment of my life, and the greatest moment for South Africans, because we equated his release with freedom.
But they soon separated, and just 2 years after the joy of Mandela becoming the first black president of South Africa, they divorced.
And how difficult was it then when the breakup occurred?
It was extremely traumatic. It was, I don't think it was of his making too. It's just the forces of change at the time made it impossible for a normal life.
They did not even have a year together. He was on the run. They didn't even get a chance to cut the wedding cake because he had to disappear soon after. And
do you still love him?
I always will. He's the father of my children, of my grandchildren. Nothing changed because he was married to someone else.
That someone else is Graça Machel, now almost constantly at Mandela's bedside.
It never even occurs to me that she is someone else. We are an extended family. We are in exactly the same position emotionally, and we have a great relationship. I call her little sister, and she calls me big sister. We share everything.
How are you? Mark Austin from ITV.
18 years ago, then President Mandela told me he wanted to see real progress in South Africa in 2 decades. His ex-wife believes he'll be disappointed change for the poor has not come more quickly.
He would have had a right to be disappointed. The rate of unemployment is a ticking bomb waiting to explode. Time will come when we have to return to the drawing board, when the leadership has to return to the drawing board and devise a policy that is not going to bruise the masses of this country.
And if that rate of unemployment continues, what is the future for South Africa, do you think?
South Africa's future would be very bleak. It is not a secret that the youth of our land is very angry.
It was angry youths Winnie Mandela rallied in the 80s in the fight against apartheid. But the firebrand leader was engulfed in controversy, accused of murder and convicted of kidnapping, allegations she denied then and denies now.
Those were like water on a duck's back, because those were manufactured by the system I was fighting against. When it suits the media, I am a murderer.
But these are still damaging allegations against you.
I don't give a damn about those allegations. They were made by the apartheid regime.
From a young age, when she'd deliver her father's speeches smuggled out of prison, Zinzi has shared his struggle. Now she and her mother, like everyone else here, is preparing for life without Mandela.
It's actually quite overwhelming. It's like my niece the other day put it very well, like where she summed up what we're going through, where she said, you know, intellectually, I'm ready to let granddad go, but emotionally, I'm not. So like when you see like all this love, the support, the concern, you know, you're touched by it, but then you're also having to confront the reality of the inevitability that death is a part of life.
Long after he's gone, we will still be pursuing his dreams of a totally liberated South Africa, which, thank God, he was able to play a major part of.
Winnie and Zinzi Mandela, and it's interesting that Winnie Mandela raises there the acute problems of apartheid still to be addressed. It speaks to the future. Our international editor Bill Neely is here. Is there any sense at all in which Nelson Mandela is still the glue that holds things together here?
Well, I think Winnie has touched a raw nerve, because millions of South Africans are deeply concerned that the country is going in the wrong direction. Look, when Nelson Mandela became president, there were probably unrealistic expectations that everything was going to change. But in some respects, the promise of his presidency has not been fulfilled, certainly not under President Zuma. Unemployment, 25%. The economy is weak. Basic services and housing for the poor are very bad. And people are fed up. As for the men at the top, Mandela represented moral integrity. Jacob Zuma doesn't. His ruling ANC party are accused of corruption, cronyism. They'll probably win the election next year, but that doesn't mean people aren't worried about a ruling elite that appears to be out of touch. You only have to look at what's happening in Brazil, even Egypt, to see that high unemployment, discontent can lead to anger, street demonstrations, and much worse.
For the moment, though, his health dominates everything, media and the politics. Is there a sense that this is a country on hold at the moment?
Almost as if the entire country is in that hospital waiting room. I mean, 24 days now of an emotional roller coaster. But at its core is not just sadness, but, as you say, a real worry about what's going to happen when he's gone, because he was this country's guiding principle, almost guardian angel. He united the country, still does today, in prayer. Without him, the transition to democracy might not have gone so smoothly. Without him now, what happens? Does the country lose its centre, lose its way? Now, we may say those fears are exaggerated, don't worry. But they are real worries for this country, because he was such a giant. And maybe that's why the government, maybe to reassure the country today, said people should prepare to celebrate his 95th birthday in 3 weeks' time.
All right, Bill, thank you very much indeed.
Here, West Midlands Fire Service has called for Chinese lanterns to be banned after a huge fire at a recycling plant. The fire started when bales of plastic at the site in Smethwick were set alight by a stray lantern which floated over the factory. Smoke from the fire rose more than a mile into the sky. Detectives investigating the discovery of a dismembered woman's body in Edinburgh have produced a facial reconstruction. Police worked with experts from Dundee University, responsible for reconstructing the face of King Richard III. The woman's body was found by a cyclist in a nature reserve at the start of last month. Now, Laura Robson went down fighting, so that particular fairy tale is over for this year's Wimbledon anyway. In the tournament's latest big upset, the woman she would have met next, the defending champion Serena Williams, is also out. Andy Murray is still going strong, though. From Wimbledon, our sports editor Steve Scott reports.
For Britain's Laura Robson.
In the end, it all proved too much for Britain's nervous-looking #1, but then the burden of a nation's expectations must weigh heavily. She managed to fight back from the brink 4 times.
That'll do it.
But on the 5th match point, Kaya Kanepi snuffed out her resistance in straight sets. From now on, though, reaching the 2nd week here will not be celebrated, it will be expected.
Close to tears.
It's been crazy, but in a good way, and you know, I'm hoping to do better next year.
In a Wimbledon full of fallen giants, another was toppled today. The seemingly invincible Serena Williams, stunned in 3 sets by German Sabine Lisicki.
She's done it!
It's turning out to be quite an unpredictable fortnight.
I didn't play the big points good enough. I didn't do what I do best, and I think I had a little hesitation, and that explains it.
But here comes Andy.
So far, Andy Murray seems immune from the failing favourites epidemic, although after strolling the 1st set against Mikhail Yuzhny, in the 2nd, Murray needed power and guile en route to a tense tiebreak.
That's a great shot.
stretched for the first time, his response was emphatic.
Oh. How about that?
Yuzhny was broken, Murray cruising to yet another straight set win. Say it quietly, but so far, so very good.
I mean, all of the matches are going to keep getting tougher. Everyone's going to be more comfortable with the conditions than they are at the beginning of the week, and you know, you don't fluke getting to the quarterfinals of a slam. You know, you need to win 4 tough matches to get there. So, you know, everyone's playing well now, and it's going to keep getting tougher.
Next up, Fernando Verdasco, unseeded and a first-time quarter-finalist who shouldn't cause Murray too many problems. But then last week we were saying that about Nadal and Federer's opponents. Steve Scott, ITV News, Wimbledon.
On tomorrow's front pages then, The Independent claims Michael Gove, the Education Secretary, is drawing up plans to allow academies and free schools to become profit-making businesses. The Telegraph quotes a report which says a nonsensical contract for senior hospital doctors agreed by Labour gave them more time off and a 28% pay rise. And the Mail reports the invention of a simple blood test which can predict postnatal depression. It shows Andy Murray after his win today. And finally, Andy Murray isn't the only British sportsman still with a mountain to climb. Spare a thought for Tour de France cyclist Geraint Thomas. He pedalled up the steep inclines of Corsica with a fractured hip for the good of his team. Lewis Vaughan-Jones explains.
Geraint Thomas is found at the race doctor here now.
He may have found the medical team, but there isn't much they can do while he's still on the road.
But he really took a thump on his back here.
And cold spray doesn't fix a bone fracture.
And he's going to have to hang on as long as he can and hope.
So Geraint Thomas is now taking on the toughest test on 2 wheels with one dodgy hip.
How are you?
Oh, been better.
That is no doubt an understatement. The results of an MRI scan show why.
There's a little fracture or whatever in my hip, and it explains a lot, because yesterday was just probably one of the worst days I've had on the bike.
But it was coming off the bike that did the damage. This was Saturday on the first stage of this year's tour. It must feel a long way from London 2012, where he won Olympic gold on the track.
He knows how much he is needed for this team.
He's carrying on to support his teammate and race favourite Chris Froome, but not everyone wants him to.
You're going to get through this, you hope, G?
Well, I'm definitely going to give it a good go. My mum doesn't want me to.
There are plenty of hard miles ahead. He's currently 194th out of 196. Lewis Vaughan-Jones, ITV News.
And that is tonight's ITV News at 10. The national weather is on the way, then the news from your part of the UK. But from Mark in South Africa and from me, good night.
Get windy here in Bournemouth.
Doesn't matter to us though. We're having a night in.
7 Seas Trying for a Baby proudly sponsors the ITV National Weather.
Hello again, a very good evening to you. Many of us saw some really lovely conditions over the weekend. The weather does deteriorate, I'm afraid, over the next few days, but don't worry too much, because by the time we get to the end of the week and next weekend, it's much better once again. So as we look ahead to tonight, I'm afraid it's going to be a fairly cloudy and wet picture across the western areas as an Atlantic frontal system starts to make tracks in across the UK. Elsewhere it's dry but rather cloudy, and for some quite a mild night. As we look ahead to tomorrow, I'm afraid that system's still working its way in from the west, gives us cloud, rain as well. A dry and fairly bright start across the far southeastern parts, but don't be fooled, into the afternoon the cloud reaches there as well. The rain always tending to be lighter and patchier though towards the central southeastern parts. Good night, see you soon.
7 Seas Trying for a Baby proudly sponsors the ITV National Weather.
Good evening, I'm Charlene White. A career criminal has been told he'll spend at least 32 years behind bars for murdering a pensioner when she caught him breaking into her home. Jean Farrer, who was 77 and partially blind, had been a model, actress and seamstress for the royal family. Her family say Daniel Barnett is the most selfish and cowardly of individuals. Piers Hopkirk spoke to them earlier.
Jean Farrer had been an actress and model in the 60s. She played alongside Roger Moore in The Saint and was a stand-in for Hayley Mills. It was on October the 25th last year that the 77-year-old, then frail and virtually blind, was attacked and killed in her own home in Brentford by teenage burglar Daniel Barnett. Barnett was walking home along this road at 2 o'clock in the morning, high on a cocktail of drink and drugs. He broke into Jean Farrer's house through an open window and, on finding her at home, subjected her to a sustained and vicious assault. With Barnett sentenced to a minimum of 32 years in prison today, Mrs. Farrer's family, who'd had to endure hearing the harrowing details of her final moments, gave their reaction.
Daniel Barnett is really, I think, just the lowest of humanity. There is no good in him at all. There was no remorse through any of this. I mean, he is the most selfish of selfish individuals. Literally the only real joy, if any, we get from this is knowing that he will not be able to do this to the parents of other families. The parents of the viewers who will be watching this will be slightly safer for the fact that he's behind bars and will be for 32 years.
Police too were left shocked by the nature of the attack.
I've been a police officer for 26 years and this has been the most cowardly, shocking case that I've actually dealt with.
Here comes the sun. To her family, Jean Farrer was a much-loved mother and grandmother. They made this film to mark her memory.
She was just an amazing person. She loved life. She didn't want to waste a single minute of every day, like even regardless of limitations of old age, being partially blind and everything like that. She just didn't let anything stop her.
Jean was such a wonderful, wonderful person. I mean, she loved everybody. She loved life. And as I say, she was just such a loving individual. She loved people. She loved animals. And now that's all gone, that's all taken away.
Described by the judge as a coward of the worst kind, Daniel Barnett will not be eligible for parole until he's 52. Piers Hopkirk, ITV News at the Old Bailey.
A report into policing standards says the Met must change its policies or risk its reputation. The Home Affairs Select Committee recommends introducing a code of ethics and fines for corruption. It comes after fresh allegations that undercover officers spied on Stephen Lawrence's family, but the organisation representing officers' interests has hit back at the proposals.
There is no need for a new set of ethics to guide the way that police officers behave. And the vast majority, it has to be remembered that the vast majority of police officers adhere to those standards and behave in the way that the public would want us to.
Meanwhile, the Met Commissioner in charge of the force when bombs killed 52 people in London in 2005 has been speaking of the emergency response. Lord Blair is honouring the July 7th victims at the British Medical Association in Tavistock Square, where 13 people were killed when a double-decker exploded.
When most people are running away, some people just decide to go forward and do wonderful things. And of course the BMA here is exactly that point, where people came out of the building to tend the dreadful injuries that occurred outside.
A woman has been sentenced for hurling racist abuse at fellow passengers on board a Croydon tram. A mobile phone footage showing Emma West's rant received millions of views on YouTube. A judge said she was suffering from mental health problems and had unwittingly overdosed on her medication. The Essex snooker player Ali Carter has been diagnosed with testicular cancer. The 33-year-old, who lives in Chelmsford, will have surgery followed by chemotherapy. Now, it could have been called the gem or pulse, and we use it for 85% of our travel on public transport in London. We're talking about the Oyster card, of course, and this week it turns 10 years old. To mark the occasion, we have more Oyster facts on our website. Go to itv.com/London. And finally, some of our most loved green spaces will be given a facelift. 4 parks in London will get a share of £5 million of lottery funding. Here's Martin Stew.
So Wesley, this isn't what I would automatically think of when you hear the words heritage. Why money here?
It's an incredibly important piece of 1970s design. And it's a housing estate, actually Grade 2 star listed, built round a 3-acre park. It may not be everybody's idea of a beautiful park, but it's much loved, this 3 acres, heavily used. There's 5 play areas, lots of different character areas, lots of wonderful planting, but it's become terribly overgrown. The structure has collapsed and it's become a bit unwelcoming. And we think this is exactly where lottery money should be spent.
This area of London has a higher than average population of children, but very limited green space.
Half of my school, they live here, and also because if it's a warm day, you always feel like you can have, children always play out, we always get to play out, have fun. You make really good friends with your neighbours, and the neighbours, they're like family to you, and everyone in this estate, they're just really close and they make you feel at home, and that's just what an estate needs.
What would you like to see the money spent on?
If there's like a little bit more facilities, so like there's only that grass but children play football on it, and somewhere where dogs can run around and have fun on it.
And it's not just the Alexandra and Ainsworth Park which is benefiting.
As well as this park in Kilburn, we're also investing today in parks in Hackney, Hillingdon, Hornchurch and Finchley. As London's population expands, we need these amazing green spaces more and more. Whether they're historic or modern, they're all beautiful green spaces.
Time now for the weather.